The rain fell softly over Seattle, painting the windows of the Sterling Room with streaks of silver. It was the kind of upscale restaurant where reservations were made months in advance, where crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths, and where the scent of truffle oil and aged wine filled the air with promises of luxury. If you believe that kindness and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Blaze, where stories like this remind us that humanity still matters. It was just past noon when the heavy oak door opened, and an elderly man stepped inside. He moved slowly, almost hesitantly, as if the weight of the world rested gently on his shoulders. His gray cardigan was worn at the elbows, his slacks were simple and unassuming, and his canvas shoes showed signs of many miles walked. A weathered leather satchel hung from his shoulder, and his wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he paused to take in the elegant dining room. To the hostess standing behind the marble podium, he looked utterly out of place. Her name was Victoria, and she had been trained to assess guests within seconds, their watches, their shoes, their posture. Everything about this old man suggested he had wandered into the wrong establishment. Still, she forced a professional smile and approached him. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation?" Her tone was polite but cool, the kind of politeness that keeps people at a distance. The old man smiled warmly and shook his head. "No reservation. Just a table for one, please." Victoria's smile tightened. She glanced toward the dining room, where wealthy businesspeople laughed over wine and tourists photographed their perfectly plated meals. Then she looked back at the elderly man, his humble appearance a stark contrast to the restaurant's usual clientele. "I see," she said, her voice now slightly colder. "We're quite busy today. Let me see what I can do." She led him to a small table tucked away in the far corner, near the kitchen doors where the noise of clattering dishes and hurried servers created a constant distraction. It was the kind of table reserved for walk-ins who wouldn't tip well or guests they hoped would leave quickly. She placed a single menu on the table without offering water or explaining the specials. "Someone will be with you shortly," she said, then turned on her heel and walked away. The old man sat down slowly, adjusting his glasses as he looked around the restaurant. His eyes were kind, observant, taking in every detail, the laughter of diners, the elegant architecture, the hurried movements of the staff. He folded his hands on the table and waited patiently. But shortly never came. Waiters passed by his table without a glance. One brushed past him carrying a tray of champagne glasses, not bothering to apologize when the breeze from his movement ruffled the old man's menu. Another server made eye contact briefly, then quickly looked away, pretending not to notice the raised hand trying to get his attention. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Then 45. The old man's water glass remained empty. His menu lay closed on the table, unopened because no one had come to take his order. He didn't complain, didn't raise his voice, didn't demand service. He simply sat there with the same gentle patience, as if he had grown accustomed to being invisible. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly know by looking at his worn cardigan and simple appearance, was that this man was Hiroshi Yamamoto, one of Japan's most influential technology pioneers. He had founded Yamamoto Technologies 40 years ago in a small garage in Kyoto, building it into a global empire that revolutionized telecommunications across Asia. His net worth was estimated at over $8 billion, though he lived so modestly that even his own employees rarely recognized him without his signature business attire. But Hiroshi hadn't come to Seattle for business. He had come for something far more precious than any contract or deal. He had come searching for closure. 50 years ago, when he was just a young engineering student on a scholarship, he had spent 2 years studying at the University of Washington. It was there, in a small coffee shop near Pike Place Market, that he had met Margaret Chen, a spirited literature student with a quick wit and a passion for poetry. They fell deeply in love, spending countless evenings walking along the waterfront, sharing dreams of the future, promising each other forever. But forever had come with complications. When Hiroshi's father fell ill, family duty called him back to Japan. Margaret's mother was battling cancer, and she couldn't leave Seattle. They promised to find a way back to each other, writing letters every week, their love surviving across oceans and time zones. Then the letters stopped. Hiroshi never knew why. He wrote for months with no reply, his heart breaking a little more with each silent day. Eventually, he buried himself in his work, building his company, marrying someone his family approved of, living a successful but emotionally distant life. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, and in the quiet that followed, Margaret's memory had returned with overwhelming force. Through a private investigator, he had finally learned the truth. Margaret's mother had intercepted his letters, fearful of losing her daughter to a life across the ocean. By the time Margaret learned what had happened, Hiroshi was already married, and she had moved on as well, building her own family and career. She had passed away just 2 years ago, never knowing he had spent his entire life wondering what had gone wrong. Now, in the twilight of his own life, Hiroshi had come to Seattle to walk the streets they once walked together, to sit in the places they once shared laughter, to whisper a final goodbye to the love that could have been. This restaurant, the Sterling Room, stood on the very spot where that small coffee shop had once existed. He had seen it while walking past and felt compelled to enter, to sit in this space and remember her one last time. As Hiroshi sat quietly in his forgotten corner, lost in memories of a love that time couldn't erase, the restaurant bustled around him. Diners were served elaborate courses, wine was poured, desserts were flambéed tableside, but he remained invisible, a ghost in his own story. Behind the bar, a young waitress named Sofia Martinez was wiping down glasses when she noticed him. She had been working at the Sterling Room for only 3 months, taking the job to help pay for her night classes at community college. She was studying international relations and had spent the previous summer volunteering in Osaka, teaching English to elementary school children. The experience had changed her life, opening her eyes to the beauty of Japanese culture and the power of cross-cultural connection. Sophia watched as another waiter walked past the old man's table without stopping. She frowned, feeling a familiar anger rise in her chest. She had seen this before, the way people judged others by their appearance, the way kindness became conditional on perceived wealth. It reminded her of her own grandfather, an immigrant who had worked in restaurant kitchens his entire life, who had been treated as invisible by so many. Setting down her towel, Sophia straightened her apron and walked purposefully toward the old man's table. As she approached, she noticed the way he sat back straight, hands folded, with a dignity that spoke of inner strength rather than arrogance. There was something familiar in his posture, something that reminded her of the elderly Japanese men she had met in Osaka, who bowed with such grace and spoke with such measured respect. When she reached his table, she stopped and bowed deeply from the waist, not the casual nod Americans sometimes used, but a proper Japanese bow, holding it for the appropriate 3 seconds before rising. "Konnichiwa, Okiakusama," she said in careful Japanese, her accent imperfect but sincere. "Hello, honored guest. I apologize deeply for the wait. How may I serve you today?" Hiroshi's head lifted sharply, his eyes widening behind his glasses. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Then his weathered face transformed, lines of sadness lifting into an expression of pure, astonished joy. "Nihongo jie hanasemasu ka?" he asked softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You speak Japanese?" Sophia smiled and bowed again. "Hi, Tsukashi," she replied. "Yes, a little. I studied in Osaka last summer. Your language and culture taught me what true respect means." Tears gathered in Hiroshi's eyes, though he blinked them back. He pressed his hands together in front of his chest in a gesture of gratitude. "You have no idea," he said, switching to English so she would understand fully, "what it means to be seen. To be treated as human. Thank you." Sophia felt her own throat tighten with emotion. She pulled out her notepad, but instead of rushing through the order, she took her time. "Have you been to Seattle before, sir?" she asked gently. "A long time ago," Hiroshi said quietly. "I came to remember someone very special. This building, a coffee shop, once stood here. It was where I met the woman I loved." Sophia's expression softened with understanding. She didn't pry further, respecting the privacy of his pain. Instead, she said, "Then let me make sure this meal honors that memory. May I suggest our chef's special? It features miso-glazed salmon with sake reduction, a small piece of Japan here in Seattle." Hiroshi's smile widened. That would be perfect. As Sophia wrote down his order, she noticed other staff members beginning to watch. The restaurant had grown quieter, diners turning their attention to the unusual scene, a young waitress speaking Japanese to an elderly man they had all dismissed. Victoria, the hostess, stood frozen near the entrance, her face pale as she realized the mistake she had made. The head waiter, Marcus, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, shame creeping into his expression as he remembered walking past the old man's table 3 times without stopping. Sophia returned to the kitchen and personally explained the order to Chef Raymond, describing the guest and asking that extra care be taken. The chef, a temperamental man who rarely showed emotion, listened carefully and nodded. "I'll make it myself," he said quietly. While the meal was being prepared, Sophia returned with a pot of fresh sencha green tea, proper Japanese tea, not the generic green tea bags they usually served. She poured it carefully, using both hands to show respect, and placed a small plate of edamame that the restaurant didn't typically offer, having asked the chef to prepare it specially. Hiroshi watched every gesture with growing emotion. "Your name?" he asked softly. "What is your name?" "Sophia Martinez, sir." "Sophia-san," he said, using the Japanese honorific. "You learn more in Japan than just language. You learned kokoro, the way of the heart. This is rare, especially here." As they talked, Sophia learned that he was from Kyoto, that he had built a technology company, that he had returned to Seattle after 50 years to remember a lost love. She shared her own story, her grandfather's journey from Mexico, her dreams of working in international diplomacy, her struggles to pay for school while working double shifts. When the meal arrived, it was a work of art. Chef Raymond had outdone himself, plating the miso-glazed salmon with precision, surrounding it with delicate vegetables carved into flowers, drizzling the sake reduction in elegant patterns. Sophia served it with another bow, and Hiroshi clasped his hands together in thanks. "Itada kimasu," he said softly, the traditional Japanese expression of gratitude before a meal. As he ate, other diners began to realize something significant was happening. Whispers spread through the restaurant. A few people pulled out their phones, curious about the old man who was being treated with such reverence. The manager, a stern woman named Patricia Holloway, emerged from her office after being alerted by staff that something unusual was occurring. She approached the table cautiously, her practiced smile in place. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Patricia Holloway, the general manager. I hope everything is satisfactory?" Hiroshi looked up at her, and in his eyes was a wisdom that made her feel suddenly small. "The food is excellent," he said calmly. But the service was absent until this young woman remembered what hospitality truly means. Patricia's smile faltered. I sincerely apologize if." "Apologies mean nothing without understanding," Hiroshi interrupted gently. "For nearly an hour, I sat invisible in your restaurant. Not because I demanded attention, but because everyone looked at my clothes instead of my humanity. In Japan, we have a concept called omotenashi hospitality from the heart, treating every guest as precious regardless of appearance." Only Sophia-san understood this. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now. Every diner, every staff member was listening. Patricia's face flushed red with shame. "Only one person in this entire establishment," Hiroshi continued, his voice soft but carrying clearly, "chose to see me. To speak to me with respect. To serve me with dignity. That person was not trained by your management. She learned it from her heart." When the meal concluded, Hiroshi asked for the check. Patricia rushed forward, stammering that the meal would be complimentary, but Hiroshi raised his hand gently. "I will pay," he said firmly. "Respect cannot be bought with free meals after kindness has already been given." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a leather wallet, removing a black card that glinted in the light, an American Express Centurion card, one of the most exclusive credit cards in the world, available only to those with exceptional wealth. Patricia's eyes went wide as she recognized it. But Hiroshi didn't hand it to her. He gave it to Sophia, along with a business card embossed in gold with Japanese characters and English text, "Hiroshi Yamamoto, founder and CEO, Yamamoto Technologies." Sophia's hands trembled as she read the card. Her eyes shot up to meet his, shock and disbelief written across her face. You're. "I am someone who was invisible today," Hiroshi said gently, "until you chose to see me. Kindness is the rarest currency in the world, Sophia-san, and you are wealthy beyond measure. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Then he bowed deeply to Sophia, not a casual bow, but a profound bow of respect, the kind reserved for honored equals. Sophia, tears streaming down her face, bowed back just as deeply. The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence as Hiroshi Yamamoto, Billionaire CEO, bowed to a young waitress who had simply chosen to be kind. Before leaving, he turned to address the room, his voice carrying a weight that demanded attention. "I have eaten in the finest restaurants across the world," he said. "I have been served by the most trained staff, eaten food prepared by Michelin-starred chefs, drunk wines that cost more than most people earn in a year. But today, I received something far more valuable. I was treated as human. Remember this, true wealth is not measured in what you have, but in who you choose to be when no one is watching." With that, he walked out of the Sterling Room, his canvas shoes silent on the polished floor, leaving behind a restaurant full of people confronting their own prejudices and failures. The next morning, Sophia arrived at work to find chaos. The restaurant's phone was ringing non-stop, and a crowd had gathered outside. Confused, she made her way through the throng to find Patricia waiting for her, holding a newspaper with shaking hands. The headline read, "Tech billionaire Hiroshi Yamamoto praises Seattle waitress in surprise visit, calls for industry-wide hospitality reform." The article detailed everything: how Hiroshi had been ignored for nearly an hour, how one waitress had spoken to him in Japanese and treated him with dignity, how he had challenged the restaurant and, by extension, the entire service industry to remember that every guest deserves respect regardless of appearance. The story had gone viral overnight. Social media was flooded with responses, some praising Sophia, others sharing their own experiences of being judged by their appearance, still others calling for change in how service workers are trained to treat all guests equally. But that wasn't all. Patricia handed Sophia an envelope with trembling hands. "This was delivered by courier this morning. It's addressed to you." Inside was a handwritten letter in elegant script. "Dear Sophia-san, yesterday, you gave me something I thought I had lost forever, the feeling of being seen, of being valued not for what I own but for who I am. In a world that moves too quickly, that judges too harshly, that forgets the power of simple kindness, you remembered. You reminded me of someone I loved very much, someone who believed that every person carries a story worth hearing, a soul worth honoring. She is gone now, but yesterday, through your kindness, I felt her spirit again. I have taken the liberty of establishing an educational fund in your name, the Sofia Martinez Scholarship for International Understanding. It will support young people like you who seek to build bridges between cultures, who understand that respect and kindness are the languages that every human speaks. Additionally, I would like to offer you a position in my company's International Relations Department, should you wish to pursue it after completing your education. Your education, of course, will be fully funded, along with support for your family's needs. But more than any money or opportunity, I want you to know this: you changed my life yesterday. In what I thought would be a sad pilgrimage to remember lost love, you reminded me that love never dies, it transforms, it passes through people like you who carry forward its essential message, that every person matters, that every human deserves dignity, that kindness is never wasted. Thank you, Sophia-san, for seeing an invisible old man. Thank you for speaking my language. Thank you for reminding me why I built a company based on connection, because in the end, all technology, all wealth, all human achievement means nothing if we forget to see each other. With deepest gratitude and respect. Hiroshi Yamamoto. Sophia read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. Around her, the restaurant staff stood in silence, many of them crying as well, not just from joy for Sophia, but from shame at their own behavior, from recognition of how close they had come to missing something profound. Patricia stepped forward, her own eyes red. "Sophia, we failed. I failed. I spent so long teaching staff to recognize valuable clients that I forgot to teach them to recognize valuable humans. I'm sorry." Sophia looked up at her manager and saw genuine remorse. "We all have the chance to do better," she said softly. "Starting now." The Sterling Room underwent significant changes after that day. Staff training was completely overhauled to emphasize equal treatment of all guests. The corner table where Hiroshi had sat was renamed the Yamamoto table, with a small plaque explaining its significance, and could be reserved by any guest free of charge, a reminder that dignity should never cost extra. But the changes went far beyond one restaurant. Hiroshi's story sparked a nationwide conversation about service, dignity, and the invisible biases that pervade society. #See Every Guest became a viral movement, with restaurants and businesses across the country pledging to treat all customers with equal respect. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the international terminal at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, boarding a flight to Kyoto. She had been accepted into an exclusive international relations program, her education fully funded by the scholarship Hiroshi had established. But more than that, she was going to work with Yamamoto Technologies, helping to develop programs that brought together young people from different cultures to learn the language of respect and understanding. As the plane lifted into the Seattle sky, Sophia looked down at the city where everything had changed. She thought about her grandfather, who had spent his life being invisible in restaurant kitchens, and wished he could have known that his granddaughter would change the conversation. She thought about Hiroshi and Margaret, two people who had loved across cultures and oceans, whose story had ended in loss but whose legacy lived on in unexpected ways. And she thought about that rainy afternoon when she had simply chosen to see someone everyone else had ignored, to speak a language of respect when silence would have been easier, to serve with her heart instead of her hands. Kindness, she had learned, was not just a nice gesture, it was a revolution, a quiet but powerful force that could transform lives, bridge cultures, and remind us all of our shared humanity. As the plane disappeared into the clouds, heading west toward a new life and new possibilities, one thing remained certain: the simplest act of kindness, saying hello, how are you, in someone's own language, had changed 2 lives forever, and in doing so, had reminded the world that we all speak the same language of the heart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it and subscribe to Blaze, where true stories of hope, courage, and kindness light the world, one heart at a time.